Well, should we just start over?
No, I mean, I'll edit some of this out, and
Okay.
then at this point, listeners will be like, "What's happening? We're 2 minutes into this podcast, and these guys can't get their act together." Hello, and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. We're back on the show. It's been a few weeks since we recorded. We had the holidays. I don't know, my house had a bunch of illness, which appears to be continuing. Everyone's been sick since the week before Christmas. And it is just Scott and I today. Hello, Dr. Scott Nelson. How are you?
What's up, dude? How are you?
I'm well. Good to see you. As I think listeners know, our last episode was Bailey's last episode. I did see her the other day. We got to hang out for a little bit, and that was nice to spend some time with her. But we're back. This is the original format, the dynamic duo, just the two of us, two white guys and a microphone.
That's right. Well, I mean, two microphones.
That's true.
Two white guys, two microphones. I mean, that's what that's the rules of podcasting. Is that each liberal white male has to get their own microphone.
Right, in their own podcast. Well, listeners, thanks for hanging with us. I think this is episode like 226, which means we should hit episode 250 by the middle of the year, right? Hopefully here in a week or so, we'll have an office and a podcast studio set up once again. We can record in person. We can have guests join us in person. I think we're going to really get back on and resume the podcast that you know and love.
I mean, that's assuming there's not another global pandemic. I mean, it is.
Don't put that juju out there.
I mean, it's crazy, dude. It's crazy. We're coming up on 3 years, man.
I know.
We're like 6 weeks away from the 3-year anniversary. It was 3 years ago, like 3 years ago this week, I think, that you and I and Bailey sat down for what was going to be the first of like 3 times that we recorded together in person before COVID hit at our old studio.
Yeah.
And then that office moved, and then we were shut down, and then I mean, it's just the mind boggles at where we're at and where we've been. In the intervening time, I've moved. You've had a child. You know, I'm not going to say we're on the other side of the pandemic. We're still, COVID's still with us, but I think it's, going to be ever present at this point. So
yeah, I think things are very different. And my house, in the last 4 weeks, we've had all of us had the flu. My daughter had strep. My wife had something else, not COVID, not flu, not RSV. Now Margot's got something else. I'll say, I texted you this, Scott. The governor and Superintendent Ryan Walters visited my daughter's daycare on Wednesday, and then Thursday she had a fever. I know that they've been public about their questioning stance on vaccinations. I don't know. I'm not saying that they infected my daughter, but
you're not saying it.
I'm not saying. I don't know, right? So, from the video that he posted, I didn't see him shaking her hand or anything, but they're all in the shared space. Who knows? I thought you were about to say something.
Oh, no, sorry.
We're just breathing. Well, Scott, now that we're back and we're recording this, it's almost the legislative session. Holy cannoli. Speaking of, not just 3 years of COVID, but we're back at it. We're about to begin the first regular session of the 59th legislature in just less than 2 weeks.
Have there already been 59 of these?
No, there's been 58.
Oh, well, there you go. Let's see.
And I think I was thinking about this today. We should probably kind of go back and make a very clear intent to explain the process here, because we have new listeners now that we didn't have when we started this podcast 4 years ago. I thought of this based on that philosophy podcast you sent me, where they vowed to not name drop philosophers and authors that listeners might not know. I think we should also vow to not just go over processes that listeners may not be familiar with.
I mean, that's a good point. We spent a lot of time when we first started going over, the idea. We all think how a bill becomes a law, and everybody thinks of the "I'm just a bill" video from the 1960s, 70s, whenever they made that. And that's true, but it turns out there's a whole lot of steps, and some of them don't make any sense. And it depends on whether it's an appropriations bill or a non-appropriations bill, and then there's committees, and then there's joint committees, and there's joint subcommittees, and there's conference, and then there's just all kind of stuff, and there's
Yeah.
vetoes and line item and veto. It gets really complicated, and so we probably do need to go back and do. I mean, honestly, for our own benefit, some every year, kind of a little refresher about exactly how all of this works. The period that we're in right now, is we've the bill filing deadline has passed, right? Lots and
Right.
lots and lots and lots of bills have been filed for the upcoming legislative session. I think that Sean Ashley from eCapital, I believe he said that there
Quorum call now.
quorum call, excuse me, quorum call. Man, look at that. eCapital, that's a callback, from quorum call. I want to say he said it's a record number of bills, but also a record number of shell bills, like record numbers of both.
Yeah, so there's roughly 3,000 bills that have been filed. I think it's a little bit over that, and about half of them are shell bills, right? And shell bills, as a reminder for new listeners, shell bill is a bill well, it's a shell of a bill, right? It's got a title, and it has no like substantive language in the inside. So it's like it is the framework that they could insert language into later. And the problem with this, and I talked to Dale Denwalt, local political reporter, about this the other day. But the problem with shell bills is that it makes it really hard for the public to follow what's happening. Right, a bill may move through the process without any language, on just the assurance from the legislator of like, oh no, we're working out the language, we'll put it in later. And so sometimes bills will pass, out of subcommittee or even out of committee, waiting for language to be inserted. And then that language might be inserted on the floor of the House, and the legislature has no time to review it. Certainly the public doesn't either, right? And so suddenly they have to vote on a bill with brand new language, right? That just sprang up right then. That
Right.
doesn't seem to be particularly transparent.
It's a way to bend the rules, right? Like, and now it's also a way to give themselves more time, right? Because this is supposed to be the bill filing deadline. This is a way to give yourself a bunch of vehicles in which they can insert language for bills that they don't know that they need yet, right?
Right.
It's a way to get around the deadline, which was supposed to be last week, of after this, no new bills. From here on, all we're doing is considering the bills that have been filed, right?
Right.
And so it's what's well, this bill was filed, and when we say consider, we mean write.
Right.
Right? The bill, the writing of bills is supposed to have already been done, and the legislature is supposed to consider them and amend them and adopt them, et cetera. This is a way to give themselves the ability to write bills as they see fit during the legislative session.
Right. I think it'd be one thing if this happened like occasionally, like, but there's no way that you can have like 1,500 bills that are a working draft, right? Like obviously, and 8 of them have the same title, and 8 of these have the same title, and that whole deal uh, just seems silly. Now, Scott, one interesting piece that we should point out is that the House and Senate each have their own rules for their chamber, and those rules are similar but not always the same. The Senate doesn't allow shell bills, I don't think. I think it's only the House that allows them. And I think it's only certain members that can file them, like just leadership. And supposedly this year in the rules, they are saying that like no shell bills are allowed to pass out of committee. Like they've got to have language before they can pass out of committee, which is a step in the right direction, but also still not all the way there.
Also, I'll believe it when I see it.
Well, right. They can always suspend the rules, right?
Right.
It's,
And because, as you said, right, shell bills can only be filed by leadership, and leadership, I mean, like, leadership can kind of do whatever they want, right? Like the speaker, the speaker is like the absolute authority in the House, right? More so even than the pro tem is in the Senate, right? The speaker can kind of do whatever he or she wants, and so and a lot of the shell bills are Mr. Speaker's bills, right? So we'll see if that happens. Um, I understand the purpose, because a shell bill is, I think they would say, I think they would say that shell bills are not intended to you know obfuscate things from the public. The intent is, okay, I know I've got a bill. I know I want it to do X, Y, and Z. I know it's going to be a heavy lift, or I know it's going to require a lot of negotiation from, this group and this lobbyist and this committee and this leader and the Senate. And so we're before I put all the language out there, we're not going to negotiate in public. We're going to do our negotiations. We're going to come to an agreement, and then we're going to put the language in the bill. And as you know, because we talked about it before, I don't actually intrinsically have a problem with that, right? Like, I actually agree that sometimes negotiating in public is not the most effective way to do it. Um, However, I think there certainly are instances where they use the shell bill process to do things that they know aren't gonna be popular, and
Mhm.
and kind of keep the outcry to a minimum.
As one example, there's, I don't know, 5 or 6 bills this year, shell bills, that are all called the Election Reform Act of 2023. Well, we don't need that many, right? What are the odds that you're going to have 5 different things that come up that aren't already accounted for in the other, 2,000 bills that are out there
Do we
that we
need
would
one? Do we
I
even
mean,
need one?
I don't think so. I
Right?
hope
Do
not.
we like do we need an election reform bill for some reason? Like, has there been an epidemic of election fraud in Oklahoma that you and I are unaware of?
No, well, no, because it's not really a thing. Um, and yeah, I mean, I just, especially issues like that are long standing, have huge consequences that definitely require or should require some buy-in, some review, some thoughtfulness. Right. We don't need an urgent election reform that we haven't already been talking about. Um, Also, there are other mechanisms, right? They can substitute language into other bills. They can change titles for bills. Like there are there's more than one way to skin a cat, as my
I
grandpa would
mean,
say.
yes, indeed, indeed. But we'll have ample time to go through all of this,
Yeah.
and we'll stop at various points along the way to remind readers, and again, occasionally remind ourselves exactly what the process. I mean, I have to relearn JCAB every year.
Oh,
Like,
right.
what
Yeah.
what
Right.
what goes through what goes through JCAB, what doesn't, how JCAB works. So
And
yeah.
and I'll say, even, so we've got 2 interns this semester. One is here in Oklahoma and one is from Oklahoma, but she is in DC. She attends George Washington University. And so hopefully we'll have one or both of them on the podcast at some point this semester. They both have a keen interest in legislation and policy, how it's written, how it's negotiated, and how to track it from the outside. And so this week, as we've been reviewing this process, it was like playing "Okay, Stop," right? Where I'm describing the process, and there was lots of like, "Okay, stop, Andy. What? Why does it do it that way?" And having to explain some of those loopholes. And they were like, "What's this joint committee?" I was like, "We're not even going to talk about that until like April. All right, just wait. Let's do one thing at a time." But it really is, I think, a good reminder for all of us about how how the process is supposed to work. And then it's good to talk about those exceptions, the loopholes, the workarounds, why they might be there. Are they appropriate or are they not? Like those are things I think we should all wrestle with. And something else to keep in mind that we should tell ourselves and our listeners is that when session starts on the 6th, right? The first couple of weeks, we always get sucker punched. There's always some big gnarly bills that get a lot of news, and even the ones that make it through committee or something may not make it all the way, right? So the overall process that we will refer back to is that we've got 3,000 ish bills now, and in a month we'll have half that many, right? Essentially half will be dead because they didn't go through committee.
And a month after that, we'll have half of those.
Right, right. The half life of a bill is about 1 month, right? And then, for most of them, and it gets winnowed down fairly quickly. So that means that there's a lot of anxiety up front, and that anxiety doesn't go away. It just gets more focused on a fewer number of bills as the process goes along. But when listeners see absurd, unconstitutional, egregious legislation in the news, as we already are, keep a little bit in the back of your mind of like, this might not go anywhere because, well, this guy files a lot of bullshit and it doesn't seem like it ever goes anywhere,
Yeah.
right? But
I
they
mean,
know that as well.
part of this too is they blatantly ignore the limits on how many bills they're allowed to file, right? Nathan Dom files bills entirely for the purpose of trying to fundraise and generate press coverage, right? Like, I mean, he's got what I mean, when's the last time Dom authored a bill that was signed into law, right?
I don't know.
Right.
Hey, but
His bills get more press than anyone else's, and most of them don't ever even get heard.
he sends out a press release with all of them. I get, you can sign up for the press releases emails, and so many from the last few weeks that he sent, like he sends it out, and I was like, I think the pro tem needs to clamp down on his use of the Senate's kind of press notification system because it's a lot, and a lot of them are, I think, openly designed to be, we'll say clickbait, right? Like they're trying to elicit a response. And I will say also, this is something I told our interns this week, Scott, is that for every legislator who files a bunch of stuff that is like just straight junk or that I just disagree with on policy, every now and then, the old blind sow finds an acorn. Another phrase from my grandfather. Nathan Dom filed a bill this year to authorize the construction of a nuclear power plant in Oklahoma, which is something that I actually agree with. And so it was like in a week where he had two or three things that I was like, this is ridiculous. And then that one came out. I was like, well, okay. There's one good one there.
Yeah.
And so you can't, sometimes we can't always write somebody off entirely, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Agree.
Well, Scott, what do you think the main issue is so far in session that everyone's talking about?
So education, and education seems to be what is sucking all the air out of the room right now. So State Superintendent / Secretary of Education, we'll come back to that. Ryan Walters. So he had to go in front of was it a Propes? Is who met this week?
The appropriation subcommittee.
Yeah.
Education subcommittee. Yeah.
He had to go in front of them, and what he was supposed to be doing was presenting his budget request for the year. Now, the budget request for the State Department of Ed is set by the State Board of Education, which was previously headed by State Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister. Since that budget request was approved, the composition of the state board has changed dramatically. Secretary Hoffmeister or Superintendent Hoffmeister is no longer in office. Mr. Walters has replaced her. He won that election, and so rather than really present the budget request that was previously approved. He kind of got into a fairly contentious back and forth with the chair of the committee. He was kind of doing some of his campaign speechifying again, and there was a lot of kind of questions about why are we even meeting, and what ultimately came out of that was Walter saying, well, the State Board of Ed is going to meet later this week. We're going to change our budget request. We're going to amend our budget request basically to what I want it to be and what the governor wants it to be. And then I'm going to come back next week and present that budget request. And the committee was like, so you just wasted everyone's time.
And I saw some tweets from, I forget who it was, some journalist that it seemed like it indicated that maybe several people's wires were crossed, like there was a miscommunication. And I mean, I don't know, but it seemed like the legislature expected one thing, Walters expected something else, and then the House staff expected a third thing, and everyone was disappointed or wrong somehow. And it's not clear what was actually supposed to happen.
Right.
But regardless, he then yesterday, right, Thursday on the 26th, Walters presented his proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year, right? FY 24, which begins next July 1st, right? The next fiscal year. He presented that to the State Board of Education yesterday, and they approved it.
Yeah.
His request. Yeah. And of course, the State Board is like entirely state appointees now.
So this is what has happened, right? Is the State Board of Education looks much different now,
Hmm.
because, well, one, remind me, when Stitt came into office, was State Board of Ed one of the state boards that the legislature granted him, like, kind of like unlimited power to, like appoint and remove members at will,
Ooh, it might have been. I know it was
right?
the Board of Health was one, right?
Right, because that's one of the things they did, is because Stitt one of the Stitt's big deal was like, I'm the governor, I'm the CEO of the state, even though that's not actually the case. That's what he thinks of his job as, and so the legislature, at his request, gave him the power to appoint, to hire and fire members of a lot of state boards. And I'm trying to remember if the State Board of Ed was one of those, or if that was one board where he always had this kind of outsized appointment authority. But 2 weeks ago, or within the last couple of weeks, he essentially dismissed 4 members of the State Board of Education, and then put 4 new members on, and kind of shuffled each where those members sit. So the board is now firmly people who are in agreement with the Ryan Walters and J. Kevin Stitt education agenda. So they put together a budget request. The board's rubber stamped it, and he'll present that next week.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, so that's everyone was like, "Ooh, he presented it and they approved it." I'm like, "Well, hang on though. Just because the State Board of Education approved it doesn't mean that the legislature is going to, right? I think we already know that the legislature and the state administration have different opinions on this. So this is a big fight last year, right? Vouchers were a lot of legislators are not supportive of that, and it whatever Walter's requests may or may not be funded by the legislature, and I think
Right.
they can like line item say no to stuff, right?
Right. Exactly.
So I think we'll see. So I think um, it'll be very interesting. And I think we are going to try to get some education advocates on the show next week or the week after to really kind of dig into this a bit more. As we said earlier, like there's no way any of us can be experts on all the legislation that's been proposed or all the issues, and education is an enormous thing. Um, also, this week, Walters sent a written request to the Department of Education and to the Chancellor of like higher ed asking for 10 years of records of any diversity, equity, and inclusion training or curriculum that has been taught in schools or as professional development or any of that stuff. And this seems, well, first of all, I don't know anyone has 10 years worth of of that found, right?
And
And
he also wants dollar amounts. He wants a record of every dollar for the last
mhm.
10 years that has been spent on any kind of training or education for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um,
Well,
which
and I mean,
I
every university employee has gone through that, just like most corporate America employees go through some kind of diversity training requirement, right?
Right. And I also, over Christmas, since we're talking about Ryan Walters, and this is, I think, pertinent, uh, he also, over Christmas, posted a picture of he and his wife and their kids posing with Santa Claus at somewhere, and said, no woke Santa for our family.
I forgot about that.
Um, right.
What does that
And
mean?
well, I mean, I know a lot of people took that a lot of people took it to mean that Santa is that the only acceptable representation of Santa Claus. I guess the only acceptable representation of Santa Claus, if you're Ryan Walters, is a Santa Claus who's white. Um,
Right.
right? Because what else? Like, what else could that mean, right? So when you take that and then you put that together with, I want 10 years of training. He didn't say 10 years of training on anti-racism. He didn't say 10 years of training on racial bias. 10 years of training on diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Hmm.
with the implication that those things are bad. I mean, I think it is irresponsible for anyone who is, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that we're public figures, but we've got a podcast, and, we've got, tens of thousands of downloads over the years. I don't know how many people actually listen, but a lot of people download it. And so I don't, I really, I think we try not to be in the business of being inflammatory or throwing out labels, but is it going too far to say that Ryan Walters is? I don't know if he's a racist, but he's certainly acting like a racist. Like, is that
Right. I mean, that's a good question. I think I don't. So I'm not going to speak to his innermost thoughts, which I do not know, but I do think that he knows how to say things that will, one, elicit a response. Um, two, I mean, there's some strategy in like keeping the other side angry all the time, right?
sure?
Especially because they might get they eventually people get exhausted, right? Like you can't be outraged at everything. I think we saw that during the Trump administration, right? That people were wearing themselves out about being angry about stuff that was certainly, I mean, not I gonna say anger provoking, or it's just certainly provocative stuff, but not all of it like resulted in change to policy. And it's it strikes me in some ways of like when you're engaging with a bully, that the response that you give them is part of the deal, right? And so I think there's, I don't know, it's tough, right? Like I could see an argument say it's irresponsible to ignore it, right? Because then you could be kind of placating it, or silence as acceptance. But I also don't know that we have established a concrete way to push back in a way that's effective and like brings about change, right? And not just stoke the fires.
Right. Um, yeah, it is. I mean, I mean, that's the thing, is how much of it is performative and how much of it is what he really believes. But at the end of the day, it also, like, does it matter? Right? Like, when
Right.
you're like, does it matter if you're asking for 10 years of data on DEI spending because you actually think that diversity and equity and inclusivity are, real threats, or are you doing it because you don't you don't give a shit and you just want to, own the libs or keep your base happy? At the end of the day, does the motivation actually matter?
Right. That's a good question. I don't know.
Right? You know?
Yeah, I am very interested to see how it plays out over this session, right? I mean, we've seen elected officials before get in and then essentially like grind to a halt because they can't get stuff done. Um, and I don't know that we've seen anybody in recent years quite as like outrageous as some of the stuff that Walter says or that Governor Stitt
Yeah.
has said,
Right.
but I guess we'll find out.
I mean, I think the other thing too is, he's, we're his budget proposal, it was just finalized yesterday. We haven't had a chance to review it. I think it was yesterday when the state board, when they voted and finalized this budget proposal. But we'll see the details of it between now and next week. The big thing is the previous budget had, I think, like $5,000 across the board teacher pay raise that was going to be like $300 million or something.
Yeah.
He has cut that in half and wants it to be based on like performance incentives. And Senator Adam Pugh has a pretty comprehensive education package that he has spent most of the last year, the legislative offseason, putting together. A lot of people are excited about it. I think a lot of folks in the education community feel like there's some good things there. I don't know that it's all good, but I think there's a lot of good that people feel like are in the Pew plan.
Yeah.
And so I am curious to see what agenda gets through the legislature this year. Is it the Stitt Walters agenda, or is it the agenda from, I mean, what I'll just say are the more serious people?
Right.
Last year there was the vouchers, that didn't go, that didn't get through. I'm sure they're going to make a run at that again this year. But when, last year there was the voucher plan, but there wasn't a lot of alternative. This year, when you've got Walters and Stitt pushing for vouchers, but you've got someone like Adam Pugh, who's an experienced legislator at this point. I think this is going to be is this like his 8th year or something, 6th year in the Senate?
Maybe did he just get
uh,
reelected?
I think he might have just got reelected, so this will be his 7th year, right?
No,
That seems about right.
I don't know. It all runs together
Yeah,
now.
right.
I think he got elected in 2018, so maybe this is his 7th year.
But we'll see.
Or 5th year.
How long he's been around for a little while now. It's not his first time. It's not his first time in session. I
think he's starting his 2nd term. I think he and like Julia Kurt are on the same schedule.
Okay. He's, I think a lot of people like Senator Pugh. I think he's got a lot of good relationships. I think he's respected as someone who is certainly conservative, but generally speaking is not a firebrand. And I think he will be able to rally some folks to support his education plan. So we'll see what gets through.
Yeah. I'm really interested to kind of, just to see what happens, how this plays out. We never know, right, from the beginning of session to, halfway through what's going to happen, and there will always be unexpected things. So, cautiously optimistic that it plays out in a way that is beneficial to most Oklahomans. Now, Scott, you mentioned something earlier that I want to come back to because you said we were going to, and that is you referred to Ryan Walters as State Superintendent / Education Secretary.
That is correct. He is both an elected and appointed. So he's a statewide elected official, the State Superintendent of Education. He's also a cabinet member of Governor Stitt because he was appointed to be Secretary of Education.
So he gets 2 paychecks.
He does. He makes more than the governor.
He makes $124,000 as state superintendent, a little bit over that, plus an additional $40,000 for his cabinet position. The governor makes like $147,000.
160K a year plus for making videos in your car. It's nice work if you can get it.
Yeah, Oklahoma Watch has a good story about this, and as always, we'll link to all this stuff in the show notes if you're interested. But they say that the 2 positions are distinct under state law. The main duty of the state superintendent is to control and direct the State Department of Education, as well as to advise the Board of Education to adopt policies and rules for the department. And, they serve as chairman of blah, 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 all this stuff. And then the duties of the Secretary of Education include oversight of the Office of Educational Quality and Accountability, which is a state agency that handles teacher certification, teacher college accreditation, and generally advising the governor of policy changes or problems with education in the state. Now, is the Secretary of Education, do you know if that's like a established thing in statute, or is that a position that the governor can create whenever he wants or she wants? Like, did Governor Fallon have one?
I do not know the answer to that. I guess if the governor creates a cabinet position, how is it funded? Is that just funded out of the office of the governor's budget, or and the governor can pay that person however much he or she wants based on what's available in their budget?
Yeah, I think that's how it is, because I mean, like the chief operating officer was not a position that existed before Governor Stitt, and when he started that, and I think that's under the executive branch purview. And I mean, $40,000 is not nothing, but it's not like a huge. It's not I would imagine not enough for most people to kind of live on, right? If you've got a family, and so.
I mean, his data bill alone could be $40,000 a year. I mean, as many videos as he makes and uploads from his car, unless he's got one of those fancy cars with Wi-Fi.
I'm sure he's probably got an unlimited plan. He also did a video the other day, like following his budget presentation to the legislative subcommittee. He did a video in the hallway, so he didn't take questions from the media, but he did a video walking along in the hallway, which I just thought was a little funny. And I honestly don't follow Walters on social media. I end up seeing stuff because people retweet it and talk about it, but
the thing is that's I mean, I'll just say one thing. I don't I think I follow him on Twitter. He didn't have that many followers. Last I looked, he had like 1,400 followers on Twitter. Which
Well, people should stop retweeting stuff if they don't want everyone to
right?
see it.
He had like 1,400 followers on Twitter. So I don't know if he's got more on Instagram, or I don't know if he uploads his videos to TikTok, or I don't
He
know.
can't. Well, he can now, not on the state server or state devices.
Oh, that's right, because China might steal it. China might
Right.
steal Ryan Walters. Ryan Walters just exceptionally valuable content.
They might know his location. I mean, that and Oklahoma's not the only state that's cracking down on that. That's like a legitimate thing. And I've heard from some like cybersecurity folks that like Americans should definitely be more concerned about the amount of data that China is able to pull from TikTok.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Ashley and I were just talking about this. She was like, she was like, are all these people that are concerned, like, that are banning TikTok from devices? Um, she was like, is that like a real thing, or is that just like like you know, because it's a lot of red states and in universities, red states, and I was like, I think it's actually a real thing. Like, I think
yeah,
there's actually, but anyway, so.
yeah. Um, well, we'll keep an eye on that. And we've got about 10 minutes left in this episode, Scott. Let's talk about maybe a few of the myriad of the other bills and topics that have been proposed this session, many of which we will undoubtedly come back to at some point. And I thought we might start with some of the bills dealing with the initiative petition process. Um, I know this is certainly one that I pay close attention to, and you and I talk about it frequently. Um, as we expected, there's a couple of bills that would um, that seek to do a few different things that would meddle with the initiative petition process.
As though it's
All of which,
broken.
yeah, I mean, all of which though I think would have to go to, not all, most of which have to go to a vote of the people, right? So there's one that would raise the signature, no, excuse me, one that would raise the percentage of like the vote share to a higher number in order for passage. So like right now, for a state question to pass, you have to get, a simple majority, 50% plus one vote. And this would raise it to 55 or 60% for measures. But it's one of the bills is it would raise it to 60%, but only for state questions that are determined to raise expenses that like to cost the state money. And so in those cases, I think there's some language they need to work out because it says it would apply to initiative petition. So originating with the people, right? Or you get signatures and that whole deal, but also to legislatively referred measures. But it says before you could even file it, like with the Secretary of State to start the initiative petition, you have to present it to the state auditor and have them give you a determination about whether that would cost money. And so, but I don't think that you have to do that on the legislative side, right? So that's like a question I have. And also, if we're going to have some third party person review it to tell us if it's going to cost money, can they also tell us if it's going to save money? And then what happens, right? If it's going to save the state money, would we lower the vote threshold? Like it's just one of those kinds of things where there's a lot of things we could do that would arguably save the state money, but they don't ever talk about those.
There's so much about this that makes me so angry. Um, like, I mean, like, first of all, there's nothing wrong with the current state petition initiative petition process, right? Like,
Yes,
it
there is.
worked. Well, okay, fine. Well,
Way
the
too hard. It is unnecessarily difficult in many different ways.
okay, well, okay. I meant to say, um, touche, touche. As someone who has run a ballot initiative, yes, it is already hard enough, right? It's
Yes,
like, yes, like
that's that's correct.
the right. It is already hard enough. This person or the people that are running these initiatives, they are not trying to fix a problem. They are trying to make it more difficult for the people in Oklahoma to have a say in our government, right? Particularly people who live in urban areas, because these people specifically don't like sooner care expansion, even though some of the people who are sponsoring these bills are also people whose districts have benefited the most from sooner care expansion, right? They don't like sooner care expansion. They don't like medical marijuana. They don't like the fact that recreational marijuana is going to pass when it goes on the ballot on March 7th. And so they want to give a vocal minority veto power over what the rest of Oklahoma approves. Right?
Mhm.
They want to create the electoral college for initiative petitions in Oklahoma. Initiative petitions in Oklahoma, and I guess I would love to have one of them on the show and say, what problem are you trying to fix? Right?
Mhm.
Right? And what they'll say is rural Oklahomans are having things forced upon them by urban Oklahomans, and I would say, okay, but what you want is for rural Oklahomans to be able to force their opinions on urban Oklahomans, right?
Right.
Like that's what you want. Um,
Yeah, and there's a bill, I think Hamilton is the author, that would do a change like that, right? Where you'd have to pass by a majority of counties, and that bill is openly unconstitutional. Like that violates the one person, one vote standard, because uh, because half the population lives in 5 counties: Oklahoma, Tulsa, Cleveland, Payne, and Comanche County gets to like 48%, so darn near close, right? So add in any other county, 6 counties live in is half the population, and so you don't have to have a majority of counties to defeat that. Like that's half the people right there, um, and so I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I don't think it'll even be heard.
I mean,
But I
for
do think,
people that seem to be very, very, uh, hmm, you know, emotional and professing their love for the Constitution, a lot of them don't seem to really understand much about what it says.
yeah, and there's an interesting bill, the Senate Bill 1110 by Shane Jett. It just adds one sentence that it says that the ballot title shall be written on the 8th grade comprehension level. And in general, you know me, I'm a proponent of making things more accessible and readable to more people. I'm 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 not saying I'm opposed to this necessarily. I'd like to go back and review past ballot titles to see how many met that criteria, but also I wonder if there's, in some cases, in order to meet other criteria, like it is impossible to write it on that level because of the content, right? Like it is already limited to 200 words. It has to include a fiscal impact statement. There's like all these things in there. And just this phrase, like fiscal impact statement, that alone might not be
Yeah.
meet the 8th grade
Here's
reading level.
here's the thought. Here's a thought. Maybe we pump a lot of money into education so that most adults in Oklahoma can understand things that are written above an eighth grade reading level.
There's an idea. There's an idea. Um, yeah, so we'll be watching these, and pretty soon, listeners, in the next couple of weeks, we'll have some like bill sheets or like bill trackers on our website to track some of these things, particularly those dealing with democracy, elections, voting. um, I'd love to have Senator Julia Kurt on sometime to talk about her legislation. She's got 2 bills I think are really interesting that I'd like to mention. One of which is about automatic voter registration, and one that is about online voter registration. That one I'll say first. She's filed this bill before. It would seek to implement or to give a deadline by which online voter reg should be enacted, right? It's already legal, it's already been passed. The election board just hasn't done it yet. And she tried this last year, setting a date of like December 31st. That's what this one would do. Um, and we'll see if it goes anywhere. I think mostly like it's important that we let the election board know that the legislature is watching, right? The people are watching and we want this. Um, and at least there needs to be more information. We need some updates about what's happening with online voter registration because it's a huge deal. Like it's a hardship for people to find the papers and mail it and all the rigmarole you got to go through to get registered to vote now. Relatedly, the other bill, I think it's Senate Bill 92, also by Kurt, would implement an automatic voter registration system. And the language basically says the Secretary of State would like create a system where the state proactively identifies people who are eligible and not yet registered, right? Presumably by looking through other state databases, driver's licenses, Medicaid recipients, SNAP recipients, I don't know, whatever else. and like cross-reference and be like, are you registered to vote? If not, we're going to send you a letter and say, hey, Scott Melson, our records indicate that you should be registered to vote. We're going to register you to vote. You don't have to do anything else unless you don't want to. Like, you can opt out. So if you don't want to, let us know. Otherwise, we'll get you registered and we'll send you a card in about a month, as a way to proactively do this. And in states that have implemented this kind of automatic voter registration, certainly those that have implemented also an online system for people to do it on their own, we've seen a pretty substantial increase in the number of people who register to vote. And often we see a cost savings on the state side because they don't have to, like, it's all the systems are electronic anyway, and they don't have to spend personnel time and money printing as many forms and going through all of this stuff that they can do on the computer behind the scenes automatically. So this could be great. Could save the state money. Could get more folks registered to vote.
Mm-hmm. Love it. I love it. Love anything that gets people registered to vote.
Nice. Scott, any bills that you haven't seen that you kind of missed this year?
No, but honestly, I haven't gone through in a ton of detail yet. It seems like, I mean, Dom has some stuff that's absolutely insane that is not going to go anywhere. I mean, no, Dom has a bill because we're training some Ukrainians on I believe on the Patriot system,
Yeah.
the Patriot system that's happening at Fort Sill, and Dom had a bill that would basically tell the federal government that they're not allowed to bring Ukrainian soldiers to Fort Sill in Oklahoma to train on the Patriot system. And he put it out. He put it in a press release, and within 24 hours, like the House, Senate Republican, or the Senate Republican conference, and I think maybe the House Republican conference too, put out a joint statement. They were basically like, "We fully support training the Ukrainians," and like, yeah,
It was like on Mean Girls where they're like, he doesn't even go here.
right. It was just blow the mind boggles.
Yeah. I didn't see any bills dealing with teachers applying sunscreen to children or hunting feral hogs from helicopters with assault rifles. We've seen those kind of legislation in the past. I guess those issues have been dealt with.
I mean, one hopes.
Right. It's a little
One
disappointing.
hopes.
That
One
didn't
hopes that those have been solved previously.
There was some fun debate, though, especially the one about the feral hogs, which is a legitimate issue. The whole helicopter assault rifle business seems, a little over the top, but what do I know? And then, Scott, we probably don't have time today, but we should talk more about this in the future. There was a story, I think back in December even, maybe it was early January, that the Oklahoma State Department of Health was going to take back control and oversight of the public health lab, which used to be in Oklahoma City here at the State Department of Health. And the governor moved it to Stillwater to this pandemic center. And they had a private company, a private nonprofit that came out of nowhere, allegedly, that was managing the lab. And I guess that's over. And now it's going back to the state. And I suspect we will hear more about this in the future because it just seems a little smelly.
Yes, very much, very much. I think there's a lot that's kind of come out about this. So far, it's no exaggeration. I say it's no exaggeration to say that the moving of the public health lab to Stillwater and having it run by this private entity has been an abject, utter disaster.
Yeah. They don't even have the funding for the pandemic center yet. Like in the legislature, this was done without the legislatures signing off on it.
Yeah.
They, paid this company $2.5 million to do it, and no one's really sure what they did. There's, the health department spent $30 million to move the public health lab up there, and then has had to kind of keep it afloat. It's been a boondoggle, Scott. It's been a boondoggle.
Well, if there's going to be a $1 billion boondoggle, we would just like to share in it, please.
Right. Yeah. Give me half that, and I guarantee you we'll have a more functional public health lab. All right, folks. Well, that's all we've got for today. Scott, thanks for joining me today on the podcast.
Hey, man. Thanks for, we thought that I'm gonna bust out a might could here. We thought we might could meet in person today. It didn't work out, but hopefully next week.
That's right. Listeners, keep an eye on the weather and the National Weather Service and your local meteorologist in the next few days. It looks like we might be in for some nasty weather next week. Also, it could not happen at all. Winter weather is extremely difficult to forecast because it comes down to is it going to be 31 degrees or 33 degrees? And that's pretty hard to be precise everywhere. So thanks for listening. Do some exercise, folks, gear up, do some yoga, some deep breathing. Legislative session is coming. I've been listening to the Daily Stoic podcast to get in the zone. We can get through this together. And I think let's fix this. We've got some really exciting stuff coming up in the next few months that we will keep you in the loop about. Lots of opportunities for you to get involved and to begin helping us build a better framework and a better infrastructure and a better platform for civic engagement throughout Oklahoma. Anyway, as we say every week, decisions are made by those who show up. Have a good week.